Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem.
This is Peah, chapter 2, Halacha 3. Before, we were getting into everything about dividing with seeds, like with grain crops and legumes, and now we're going to get into divisions of fields with trees. Keep in mind, in the ancient world, in areas that were rocky, like in Spain or North Africa or Greece or Turkey, or areas in the Jerusalem hills, the land is very rocky with giant boulders all over the place and with hills all over the place. And in these particular areas, ancient civilizations had a hard time plowing out all these giant boulders along this uneven terrain, and the crop really wasn't going to be barley or wheat. It was going to be olives, because with olives you can generate for a society a lot of calories. You can preserve them for food, or you can turn them into oil, and so that you didn't need to plow a field to plant olive trees. You could walk between boulders, and there was no problem going between these boulders and collecting the trees from olive to olive. So even if you have these big boulders in the way, it's still going to count as an olive grove. The Mishnah says like this. It says, everything, even the separations listed above, divides for a field of seeds. But nothing divides for a field of trees except a fence. An exception to the rule that a fence divides an orchard is, but if there were knocking branches, ve'im chaya sa'ar. So when it's saying sa'ar, it's saying this word like hair, and we're going to get into that. So, but if there were knocking branches, the fence does not divide the orchard. Rather, one gives a single peah for all the trees. This word here, sa'ar, literally means hair, but it's going to fit in with the scripture in Judges 3:26, where that's going to refer to things as thin branches. So that whether you have this fence and you're having very, very big branches interlocking, or even if you're having small twigs interlocking between one tree and another, the Mishnah is very precise by picking the word sa'ar here, this hair, and saying that even these very, very, very fine branches going over the fence and connecting together is not gonna divide a field of trees. The Mishnah says the fence does not divide the orchard in the case of these knocking branches or even little branches and twigs. Rather, one gives a single peah for all the trees. And another case in which the fence fails to divide an orchard. And regarding an orchard of carobs, it is not divided even by a fence as long as the trees are within view of one another. In other words, if a person is standing on top of one side of the fence and can see the trees on the other side, it's going to still count for a carob differently. Now, the Mara Fulda is going to explain why carob trees are different and treated differently than every other tree, and he's going to be basing it on the commentary in the Torah's Kohanim on Leviticus 19:9. And here's what the Mara Fulda says. He says that the Mishnah means that if a person is standing besides one tree, he could see another person standing besides the other tree. But carob trees are treated differently in the Halacha because of their extensive root systems, that it requires them to be planted further apart from each other than a normal tree. Therefore, an orchard of carob trees always consists of trees separated from one another by very large distances. And accordingly, the orchard is defined by visibility, and trees within sight of one another are considered part of the same field, even when separated by a barrier such as a fence for this kind of tree. The Mishnah records the practice of the Nasi's household to corroborate its ruling about carob trees, and then, incidentally, the Nasi's practice regarding the olive trees as well. Something to note in the Mishnah, it's very odd that they're putting carob trees before they're putting the olive trees, but we're going to see an explanation for that later. Rabban Gamliel says in the Mishnah, it was the practice in my father's house to give a single peah for the olive trees that they had in each direction, and to give a single peah for all their carob trees, even if they were separated by a fence, as long as they were in view of one another. And the Gemara is going to explain what this means about the difference between the olive trees from the Nasi and the carob trees, but just something to note that the Mishnah is talking about the carobs before the olives, which is unusual. Normally, the fruits of the land are going to take precedence. Something else to notice and keep in mind is that traditionally, whenever they were planting fields of trees, they would take this area of land that we were talking about yesterday, the Betrova, and they would organize it where they were always planting 10 trees within a Betrova. Now, carob trees, because the roots go out so wide, you can't plant 10 of them into a Betrova. And so that inherently makes it different from every other kind of tree. If you're taking apple trees, or you're taking almond trees, or you're taking olive trees, you can plant 10 in a Betrova, but you can't do that for the carob tree because the roots go out too wide. And it's amazing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu designed the tree where you can always fit in 10 into a Betrova because of the way the root structures work, and that's always going to be going into this size plot of land, and that this Betrova is also corresponding to this other measurement where, by the way, this measurement is also corresponding to measurements that are going into a mikveh. They're subdivisions of the same measurement system, and that you can use this same measurement of seeds and it will cover this Betrova with wheat seeds or barley seeds. And so it's amazing that when Hashem created the root systems for these fruit trees, that you're putting in 10 per Betrova, but not with the carob tree. So the Mishnah is going to finish up, and it's going to say a different version of the practice of the Nasi's household regarding the carob trees. And it says that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Tzadok, said in the name of Rabban Gamliel, it was the practice in my father's house to give a single peah, even for all the carob trees they had in the entire town. So they're saying that a single peah would work for all the carob trees in the town, even if they were not within view of one another, and even if they were not separated by a fence. The Mishnah begins by saying everything dividing a field of seeds, but nothing divides an orchard except a fence. The Gemara is now going to ask, well, what is meant by knocking branches? The Mishnah proceeded to rule that even a fence does not divide an orchard if there are knocking branches. The Gemara is going to seek to clarify the term. So the Sugya says, does it mean that the branches knock against the fence like a pestle against a mortar? Or does it mean that the branches knock against each other above the fence? That's a very good question. In other words, are they pressing against the fence, or do these branches and twigs interlock with each other above the fence? And the Rambam is going to say in Hilchos Matanos Aniyim 3:19 that both sides of the Gemara's inquiry hold that the branches touch the fence. The only question is whether they also touch each other. And the Gemara is going to state, according to the Vilna Gaon, that according to the second position, it suffices for the branches to interlock above the fence without touching it. So perhaps in the Rambam's version, you have some of the branches that are touching the fence, but they could also be touching above. And according to the Vilna Gaon's statement, that the Gemara is just going to be the second position where it's only touching above. And it wants to know, well, what happens if it's just touching the fence? Is that going to suffice? Does it have to just be touching above? Can it be touching both, like what the Rambam is saying? So what is meant by this? So the Sugya answers and it says, the Mishnah says knocking branches, and it does not say knocking fence. And this conveys that the branches knock against each other above the fence. So even though the fence fails to divide an orchard if branches on opposite sides interlock with each other, the fence on each other, in other words, according to the Rambam, they must also touch the fence, but other Rishonim or also the Vilna Gaon are going to disagree. The Mishnah stated that the knocking branches negate the ability of a fence to divide an orchard. And the Gemara is going to cite a series of really enigmatic statements to qualify this ruling, and then it's going to explain the statements. Rabbi Manna would sometimes say, again, this is the Rabbi Manna who is the Rosh Yeshiva in the north, one of the later Amorim, and he would say, when the sages are within 4 amos, and at other times he would say when they are within 10 tefachim, and yet other times he would say when they are planted at a density of 10 to a bet seah. Again, we were talking yesterday about the bet seah being an approximate area of 50 amos by 50 amos, and within this area of the bet seah, that they would plant 10 trees. It was the custom and normal thing to do 10 trees within it. And if you're using this Talmudic approximation of 3 for a ratio of the circle's inner diameter of the radius, we arrive at a radius of 9.12 amos for each circle, which is the tree. So the adjacent trees are going to be approximately 18 and a quarter amos apart. And the farmers would typically plant 10 trees in the bet seah because it is the maximum distance in which a sapling is going to receive full nourishment from the ground. And we find that this density is critical in other areas as well. So it's amazing how if you're planting 11, 12, 13 trees, saplings in the Bet Rova, you're not going to be reaching full nourishment for all the trees, but magically it comes out to 10. That if you're planting 10 within this Bet Rova, that you're going to get full nourishment for the trees. And it's amazing how this is also going to correspond to this measurement for throwing wheat into a field or barley into a field and buying a seah of seed and covering this area of ground completely with seed. So how do we understand this, asks the Gemara. And the Gemara is going to answer. It says, Rabbi Manna's first statement means that knocking branches connect the trees on opposite side of the fence only when the trees are within 4 amos of the fence. And the second statement means that the knocking branches establish a connection only when the branches are within 10 tefachim of each other. And the third statement means that the knocking branches form a connection only when the trees are planted at a density of 10 to a bet seah. In other words, if the branches of the tree on one side of the fence must be within 10 tefachim of the branches of the tree on the other side of the fence, this stipulation seems to be contradicted by the Gemara above, which concludes that the branches must be interlocking. So it's gonna come to mean that only a few of them have to interlock, but the rest of them, or most of them, only need to be 10 tefachim from each other. Something to note about this, the Rambam does not codify any of the three conditions stipulated by Rabbi Manna, and commentators suggest that this is because Rabbi Manna's second statement that the branches on either side of the fence must be within 10 tefachim other is contradicted by the other Gemara, which requires them to interlock. And moreover, when the branches interlock, the connection between the trees on the opposite side of the fence is so strong that none of Rabbi Manna's conditions are necessary. And faced with this contradiction, the Rambam decided in the favor of this anonymous Gemara rather than with Rabbi Manna. So the Rambam does not hold by this statement by Rabbi Manna. The Mishnah reported that Rabban Gamliel's father would give a separate peah for the olive trees that he had in each direction. And this apparently means that he would give one peah for each direction of the compass, like one for the trees in the east and another for those in the west. And the Gemara is going to clarify what on earth does this mean? What does this mean that you're going to give for each direction of trees? The Gemara is going to ask, who delineates these directions? How is it decided where the east trees are and where the west trees belong? And the Gemara answers, it says, a town delineates the sides. Now we have to keep in mind that we're talking about Eretz Yisrael, and you would have a village in an area, and then outside of the area you would have olive groves. And so let's say you had a rectangular village. The north area would have olive groves over here in the north, and the south side would have olive groves outside of the town to the south, and then olive groves to the side of the east, and olive groves to the side of the west. Or alternatively, if you had a triangular shaped village, basically, it comes out to basically be a triangular shape, you'll have maybe one to the south, maybe one to the northeast, maybe one to the northwest. And effectively, the town is splitting up these sides where you have these orchards that are surrounding the field. So Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Bun, says, the house of Rebbe had 4 olive presses, one in each of the 4 sides, in each of the 4 areas of town. And they would distribute to each olive press the olives that were harvested on its side. In other words, there was a olive press on the north side of the town, and it would take the olives from the north area of the fields on the north side of town. And the south side of the town had an olive press, and it would take the olives from the south area of the town, so on. So under this practice, all of the olives on one side are viewed as having been harvested together, and then they require their own peah. In other words, when you're taking all the olives on the south side of the town, that effectively has its own peah, and is being brought to this olive press in the south side of town. And then you maybe have other workers that are going to the north side of town, and they're going out into the groves in the north side of the area of these olive groves that surround the village, and you're taking from all of the north area, and you're bringing them to the olive press in the north area of town, and that effectively will require its own peah because those are being viewed as being harvested together. You're harvesting the north ones together with the north ones, and the south ones together with the south ones. So the Gemara is going to state that a single peah suffices for carobs divided by a fence, provided they are within view of each other. Now, something to point out, that the Mishnah starts off talking about carobs, and then it goes to olives, and in the Sugya, it starts off talking about the olive trees before it gets to the carob trees, and I just want you to notice that. It's unusual. So the Gemara is going to qualify this ruling on the single peah for carobs, whether it's divided by a fence, and even if they're in view of each other. And it says like this, Sugya says like this, says, if there are 3 rows of trees, the outer trees, and they see the middle ones, and the middle trees, and they see the outer ones, but the 2 rows of outer trees do not, quote unquote, see each other, the law is as follows. One may separate peah from the outer trees for the middle ones, or from the middle ones for the outer ones, but one may not separate peah from one row of outer trees for the other row of outer trees. In other words, you have these rows, although one row of outer trees is linked to the middle row, and the middle row is linked to the outer row, we do not say that the three rows are linked together in a single chain. Rather, the two outer rows remain unconnected to each other. And because of that, that's going to determine how we're going to determine peah on these very, very big groves of trees. So tomorrow we're going to get to Halacha 4 in chapter 2, and we're going to talk about threshing floors. Thank you very much.